Welcome to Kev's Travel Stories. Each week I'll be bringing you a story from the weird and wonderful world of travel, a world that can change the way you see life and love and even the way we find meaning. Places that are iconic and sometimes surprising and even terrifying. So sit back and enjoy while we go on a magical mystery tour together. Welcome to Kevin's Travel Story. This one is a sobering tale, a cautionary tale of how I lost my child in New York City. Yes, it is something that still lives with me and is deep in the memory of my body. Just imagine finding yourself in a football stadium. 100,000 fans are pouring out to leave. It's the Giant Stadium in New York, no less. The event was a World Cup football match in which Ireland played Norway. The team was the Jack Charlton team of the heyday, and this was the first and only World Cup that had been played in America. The whole of the Irish nation was on fire because in the very first match in the Giant Stadium, Ireland, the Minnows, had beaten one of the big beasts, one of the favourites, Italy. And now we were on a journey. I had emptied my bank and put everything on a credit card because at that time I was a poor, deranged writer. My son was 11 and I knew I had to give him something. We didn't live together, so I was a father that was living alone, and I needed to connect to him and give him something that would live long in his memory. The fact that I was totally broke and put it all on a credit card, I'm still quite proud of, because it was a trip to see a sporting event. And I think, though many people said, you can't do this, you can't afford to do this, I know that it was actually one of the better financial decisions I've made in my life, because I don't think my son Ciaran has ever forgotten it. It was our first time to New York City. Can you imagine that? It was the first time visiting this incredible metropolis and going with a bunch of mad Irish football supporters. It really goes to show the importance of following your tribe to big events. And I'm going to end up by telling you a little bit about that. But first, the horror story of losing your child. The day had started very well. We had got up, we decked ourselves out in all our green Irish finery. We joined the other multitude of Irish fans on the coach out to the Giant Stadium, this iconic stadium. We arrived there, we mingled with the Norwegian fans, who I have to say were absolutely fantastic. They all had their plastic axes and their Viking helmets. They were even more vocal than the Irish fans, which is saying a lot. I had a sublime moment before the match started when little Ciaran went and sat down. The Irish fans had decked the Giant Stadium in green jerseys and these flags that hung over the awnings of each of the balconies, the teep-steered balconies that looked down onto the pitch below. And I can remember we'd got there so early that little Ciaran was sitting there, and I'd gone to phone his mum, and it was luxury. It was like being in a posh cinema at the Giant Stadium, even in those days. And I remember coming back and looking down and seeing him, and I could almost feel his excitement as a little 11-year-old being in New York and following his dream. Well, that was the best part, and one of the great memories I have. Then things went rapidly downhill. When the match ended, Ciaran asked for a burger. Now, he'd been well-minded and well looked after up to now, and I said, no, we're going back into town, we'll catch the coach and we'll eat when we get into town. Well, he was not having anything of it, and in a fit he stormed off and was soon lost in the crowd. I was sort of taken aback, and I can remember thinking, oh, well, he'll come back. I stood there for a moment. That moment developed into 20 seconds. That 20 seconds developed into a minute, and suddenly the hairs on my back of my neck started to creep up, and a coldness gripped my heart. He was nowhere to be seen. I chased down after him in the direction he'd gone. Not a sight of him. By now, the 80 to 100,000 people, it was absolutely huge, the stadium, and jammed, obviously. And the people were pouring out. There was rivers of people going in every direction. Norwegians, Irish. Oh, my goodness me. The cold hand of fear that had clutched my heart was actually digging its nails in, because the more I went down the various escalators, the more I became lost, and there was no sign of my son. These awful fears were creeping into my mind. We're in New York. New York doesn't have a great reputation. There are serial killers. Who knows what could happen to a poor, defenseless 11-year-old Irish boy wandering around this huge stadium. It was really rather awful, I'd have to say, and I'm even getting a slight palpitation as I recall it. Well, I can remember going into this area where they had these giant sprays. It was like a little village, and they had this mist to cool people because it was like 75 degrees, nearly 30 degrees centigrade. And I went through the spray thinking, well, maybe he's there. He wasn't there. I started asking people. By now, my throat was parched. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I was getting this sick nausea feeling. I was sweating. My hands were shaking. I was wondering, what would I possibly say to his mother back in Dublin? I've lost your son in New York, and he could end up with a serial killer. All of these thoughts, as any parent or anybody who's ever lost anybody in a big crowd, your mind goes into overdrive. It was not, dear listener, a pleasant experience, and even as I recall it now, it makes me feel a little nauseous. I decided to go back up. Maybe he's gone back to this awful hamburger bar that he wanted, this unnecessary hamburger. I went back there, no sign of him. I went back into the stadium and looked at our seat, no sign of him. By now the place was empty. The stewards were going around. It must have been 20-25 minutes. I was starting to reach my wit's end. My body was shaking. I was actually filled with dread. A policeman came up to me and said, "Sir, is there anything I can do for you?" And I told him, "I've lost my son. I don't know where he's gone." And he got on the blower, and on one of his things he said, "Well, what you should do, sir, is go down underneath the stadium. There is the command and control center, and if anybody's lost, that's where they're going to go." So he directed me there. It was a long journey, dear listener. It was a horrible journey. I was looking out all the time. I detoured to the coach park where our coach was. The coach driver was driving off. I stopped him and said, "Well, what are we going to do? I can't find my son." He said, "Well, listen, there'll be more coaches leaving, so just pick up one of your coaches and good luck." And roared off. Not much sympathy there. I came back in. I asked a couple of Irish fans if they'd seen a little boy. Unfortunately, they hadn't. Some helped join me. And I slowly gave up on looking around the outside of the giant stadium. There was no sign of Ciaran. I made my way back in. I got more directions, and I went down to the command and control. Well, this is deep in the bowels of the giant stadium. The coaches with the players and their outliers, the cops on their Harley Davidsons, were revving up and leaving. There was this extraordinary atmosphere of this is the hub, this is the center, this is the hub of the beast, which is the giant stadium. Off the coaches roared, off Jack's team went. I made myself round, asked a couple more cops, a couple more stewards, and was led into the command center. I looked up, full of TV screens, full of men checking and security. I couldn't see anybody. I could see no sign of Ciaran. Had I lost my son? Had I lost him? "Hey, sir, is this your son?" There, behind a console of TV screen, came Ciaran. I have to say, he did look contrite. I have to say, I was mixed with elation and absolute fury at what he'd put me through just for the sake of a hamburger. Well, we had words, there is no doubt about that, and a rather chastened Ciaran and a rather relieved Kevin climbed our way back, and we went into the car park where the coaches were, and there was not one coach in sight. And so began what turned out to a 5-hour journey to get back to New York. We eventually got a coach. It took absolutely ages. He went on the wrong way. It was like some sort of mythical Greek tragedy or farce. By the time we got back to New York, instead of it being 2 p.m, it was nearly 7 p.m. By then, we'd both calmed down. By then, we'd sort of reconciled over burgers and chips in a wonderful restaurant near Central Park, near Columbus Circle. We decided from then on that we would not wind each other up. I don't think we did. We had some wonderful experiences in New York. One moment, apart from the craning of the neck to see these incredible buildings, there's nothing like the first time in being New York. I will be doing a separate podcast on New York, but just to share with you the wonder of the tall buildings, even though it's ingrained in our consciousness through all the TV and films, there's nothing quite like it. To share that with your young son and to share the wonder. And we did 3 things that will live with me forever. We took an open bus, Greyhound bus tour around New York. I will never forget our guide. He was an older guy. He smoked. He had those watery eyes. He must have been very old and very asthmatic and very emphysemic, actually. But he was a beautiful human being. And he told us this wonderful thing as he took us to the Chinese Quarter and we went to a Chinese temple. He told us how 126 languages were spoken in New York. And we were both fascinated and really moved going into this temple. The otherworldliness of New York. Every nation was gathered there. It was a city of the world, and that really touched me. The other thing we did, which I would strongly recommend, is we took the Diamond. This is the cruise liner, small cruise liner that goes all the way round New York. And you can get on this. There are several varieties, but they're all very, very well priced. We took the perfect timing, unknowingly. I think it was 5 o'clock, and it went up round Manhattan. And as it went up Manhattan, underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, the lights started to come on. This was summertime, so it was quite late, and the lights came up over New York, and you saw these ribbon of diamonds approaching you, which were the cars of bright light, and then there was ribbons of diamonds, of red diamonds going the other way, and these were the headlights coming towards you up these fantastic alleyways, these canyons, and the lights of the cars retreating. That is something I will never forget. And by then we'd made up, we were again fond of each other, and that was one of the high point moments. And I remember giving Ciaran a big hug and a big kiss, and really relishing the fact that we'd made this journey, and I knew I'd made the right decision, even though I broke the bank and it took a few years to pay off that debt. But it was worth every penny. And since then, we've cemented memories. We've been together with ourselves and family members to the Olympics in London. We have been to several Euro matches in Europe. One in particular, we went with Ciaran and his mother to Bordeaux, and we had an absolute ball there, following Ireland, drinking fine wines. But it all started with that incredible decision, against all logic, to go to this great metropolis in New York. So I would strongly recommend you would do that. Just don't lose your child on the way.